Okay, well, welcome back to ED 721. Tonight we're going to talk about economic development organization financing, and we're going to start out with a guest speaker, Amity Farrar from Power 10 Capital Campaign Operations, and she's going to talk about fundraising for EDOs, which is becoming more and more important for economic development organizations. And so let me pass it over to Amity.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you for Professor Miller for letting me join you all. And I am happy to take questions throughout this conversation. It actually makes things more interesting rather than me just talking for our time together. So please feel free to submit questions, and I'll keep an eye on the conversation section here on the web. But as Professor Miller said, I'm with Power 10. So our bread and butter, what we do mostly is running major or capital campaigns to fund chambers of commerce, economic development organizations. That's about half our work. And then the other half is community nonprofit fundraising. We also do some other things, some strategic planning for those organizations, some executive search and a few other things. And I'll get into Power 10 a bit more in a moment. I'm going to change the presenter status. Is that what I should be doing, presenting now? No, never mind. Okay, so let's get into it. Great. So our goals for the class today, what we would like to do is talk about how to assess a funding situation. So giving you the information to spot the issues that may come up and analyze when you may need to seek additional funding, and then determine how you can go about getting that extra funding. So real quickly, I was just taking over as presenter. Sorry for that. So here's our agenda. So I'll tell you a bit about Power 10, and then as we discuss how to assess a funding situation. So what questions should you ask when you are at a chamber or other economic development organization and thinking about maybe going to the next level and how you're going to actually secure the funding to do such a thing. And then number 3 here is determine what to do. So we'll talk about some common options and trends, and we'll talk about capital campaigns as one of those options for securing increased funding for your organization. I have Q&A here at the bottom, but please ask questions throughout, like I said, and ask anything. No question is silly. So as I mentioned, we run different types of capital campaigns. About half of our work is with chambers of commerce and economic development organizations. And as you all probably know, in some communities, the Chamber of Commerce has the ball on economic development. They own that. In other communities, there's a chamber and then a separate economic development organization. Sometimes they're housed in the same building. So there are a lot of different models for that. And I will be talking about both chambers and EDOs, sometimes kind of interchangeably. But typically we're focused on big initiatives that improve or increase the prosperity in the community. So what are we talking about raising money for when we help chambers or economic development organizations with capital campaigns? Well, these are, like I said, big programs, big initiatives directed to, and I will go over some of these bullets, new business recruitment, business retention expansion. The third bullet, small business startup and support entrepreneurship, and supporting entrepreneurs is a really hot area that we've found now, and you all may be talking about that as well in this course. Sometimes developing industrial space is something else that needs to be financed, spec buildings, things like that, putting together the money to undertake that kind of project. Talent and workforce is another hot area that we're seeing our clients really wanting to fund, making sure that businesses want to come to a community because they know they have the employees there that can help support them. Downtown development strategies and others. So those are some of the programs to be funded. So what does that money actually go for? So the previous slide is the type of programs or projects, and then how do you actually implement those? And that's through the money. Here on this slide, these funds commonly pay for. And one of the most typical is new or existing staff. So for many of our clients, their initiative that they're seeking to have funded, one of the components of that is talent and workforce, as I mentioned, being a hot area. And many of them have not had anyone getting up every day focused on that. So hiring someone to do that is a common thing that these funds are commonly paid for. Contracts with consultants, of course, so having consultants do some of that work. Marketing strategies, travel to conferences, maybe to target particular sectors, that kind of thing. Opportunity funds or cash reserves are another thing the money goes for. Sometimes we have building campaigns, that final bullet there. It can be a little bit harder to get the business community, and what we'll be talking about tonight mostly is private sector support for these programs. It can be hard to get them really fired up about a new building. And so we typically recommend, if that's what you really want, let's tie that to an overall initiative and show how we really need this new building and what else are you going to be doing? What kind of muscled up plan are you going to be doing that solves some community problem? Okay. So about half of our work is not in the economic development chamber space, and that is in the community nonprofits, or what most people think of when they think of nonprofits. So parks, libraries, museums, churches, that kind of thing. And you see a little picture here of Railroad Park in Birmingham, which is a project that we worked on, which was really exciting. Okay, I don't see any questions yet. Feel free to ask if you have any. So for the So here's a summary again of what some of the funds pay for, and these are typically with the community nonprofits, so buildings and programming. And we just mentioned this because this is half of our business, and often chambers and economic development organizations are asked in a community to help when these kinds of programs, you know, building a new library, building a new park, when those projects come up. So just wanted to mention that. Okay, I'll just run through this very quickly. I've already mentioned some of the other things that we do. So Professor Miller asked if we find that one type of use of funds is an easier ask. So in the chamber economic development space, buildings are one of the least, or they're one of the most difficult to actually raise funds for. In the community nonprofit space, it really depends on the client, but typically in the community nonprofit space, it is funding a building, so a physical asset, and that's what I think a lot of people think of when they think of a capital campaign. And let me know if that answers your question or not, Professor Miller. Okay. So I'm not going to give you a commercial on us. We've done a lot. I'll flip quickly through that. And I'll just let you cast your eyes real quickly over some of the economic development organizations and chambers we've worked with recently. So we are based in Atlanta, although I'm actually in Colorado Springs right now. We're based in Atlanta, but conduct capital campaigns all over the country, which makes things interesting. We can share best practices and share with different communities what some of their neighboring or further flowing communities are doing. Okay, so let's get into the meat of it. How to assess a funding situation. So what questions should you ask? So this could be the type of questions you ask when you are interviewing with an organization, when you joined a new organization, when you're considering accepting a promotion in an organization, helping you figure out how they're funded and if that funding is adequate. So asking about their annual budget and how that compares to previous years. Is the budget adequate to accomplish the mission? Do they have enough money to do the basics that they've been doing, or would they have enough to do more if they want to? How do they get their money? What's the public-private split? What percentage comes from the public sector versus the private, or earned income? So getting fees from projects that an economic development organization works on. And what is the process to secure funding? Do they have to go back to, for example, to the county commissioners every year? Is it a once every 5 years, which is typically the capital campaign model? You typically run a campaign and that's seeking private sector pledges over a 5-year period, or is it some sort of hybrid? We'll get into some specifics about the process. And who's responsible for fundraising? Is this an office where everyone is seen as having some responsibility for bringing in money for fundraising? Or is that typically the executive director's role? Or is there even someone on staff who is in charge of, say, stakeholder relations or something like that? And so Professor Miller just asked, are the campaigns connected with strategic plans, which are often 5-year too? Exactly, Professor Miller. And we'll get into that in more detail. But typically what we're doing is looking at a need for that community that the organization can solve, putting together a strategic plan to help solve that need or problem, and then how do we implement that plan? Typically, you need additional resources to implement that plan, because typically we're talking about doing something bigger, better, more than the organization has been doing. And we'll get into that in a little more detail shortly. Okay, so part 2, what funding opportunities or approaches should we consider? How will we get the money we need? So some of these are just or primarily in the chamber world. Some are primarily in the economic development organization world. Some are both. But as you all probably know, chambers of commerce often get a lot of their money from dues and events. And they also get a lot of funding from total resource campaigns, and I'll go into an explanation of that shortly. Capital campaigns, which we'll talk a bit about, is another common funding solution. Actually, it really is the trend, having economic development organizations that are public-private partnerships, and the private sector is usually funding through these 5-year pledges through a capital campaign. There's, as I just mentioned, public sector funding, and that comes in a lot of different ways, including fees. Okay, so a little bit about chambers of commerce. So historically, dues have been one of their significant, where a significant portion of their budget comes, and the majority of their revenue coming from that. There's been a gradual decline in that over the years, and the dues were usually based on how big is your company, either based on revenue or number of employees. Recently, there have been shifts to tiered benefits, which is what you get for various membership levels. So a small organization could come in at a high level and get certain benefits there. Events are another common way for both chambers and some economic development organizations but much more chambers to raise money. So, parades, parties, big galas, that kind of things. And you have the private sector sponsoring all or parts of those events. And then there's also money coming in from ticket sales, vendor fees, that kind of thing. At the bottom here, I have mission-related example. We ran a campaign for Rome Floyd County Chamber of Commerce in Georgia. And they are a chamber that has the ball, so they own economic development as well as traditional chamber functions. And they have a big conference each spring that brings together technology entrepreneurs. It's called Confluence, and that brings in money, but also is related to their mission. So that and their sector focus. So bringing technology entrepreneurs to the table and to the community fits in with their mission, as well as bringing in funds. Whereas many of the chamber fundraising events aren't closely tied to their mission. And our general advice is, if it can be tied to your mission, that helps for a variety of reasons, including it's what you're known for. It's actually helping affect your mission as well as raising some money. So this whole entire slide is about community events. Here's some questions to think about if you go and join an organization that has a big event every year and that raises, let's say 20% of their budget or whatever. Here's some questions we would recommend asking. So is it mission centric? We just talked about Confluence, the Rome Floyd kind of example, and there it was. But what about if it's a parade or a picnic or a gala or something? Is it the best use of staff time, and should it be scaled back? Questions 2 and 3. So if any of you have planned events before, you probably know it takes a lot of man or woman power typically to do so. And so the return on investment of how much can actually be brought on based on or in comparison to how much time someone spends on it is not always a great return on investment. So that's something to think about. And you may want to think about what another organization, could this be spun off and another organization lead this, or could you do it as a joint venture if it's something that's very popular and if it's lucrative as well. So that's a bit about events. Another source of revenue for chambers is affinity programs. I'm not sure how many of you have heard about this, but this is a funding stream that comes from chamber members purchasing things. So it's often like overseas travel or insurance. And so the chamber will enter an agreement with, let's say, a travel provider. And then when chamber members buy trips through that travel company, then chamber gets a percentage of that. I mean, it's almost like selling Girl Scout cookies. So getting a percentage there. And the good things about this, excuse me, are it's pretty easy money. It's the members are already there. It can be good. These programs can be good deals for the members, so the members can be happy about it. And so there's very little harm often in doing these. But a question to be asked is just, is it sufficient for funding the organization? And usually it's just one part, and usually a rather small part of the total budget. Total resource campaigns is another funding source at some chambers. And it was developed many, many years ago in the 1980s, actually in my hometown, the Metro Atlanta Chamber. And the idea there is you get a good group of key business leaders in the community, and they get their friends and neighbors, their peers at other businesses on board to invest in the organization through memberships, sponsorships. So it's really leveraging your business community to bring more money and get more members on board rather than just relying on staff. So this bottom section of the slide says most chamber leaders either really believe in total resource campaigns and love them. There are others who are not as big fans because it does take a lot of staff time to manage all of those volunteers. Also, if any of you have managed volunteers before, you know it's different than managing staff, and it can be a bit challenging. You're asking your members and your key investors to work for you, and sometimes they do better jobs than others. So there can be some downsides, but this is a way to bring in some pretty big money, and they're usually conducted on an annual basis, so it's like an annual campaign. Okay, so finally we'll move into another funding source that I know the most about, and that's capital campaigns. So this first bullet covers Professor Miller's question earlier. We are funding the implementation of 5-year strategic plans. Now, it could be a 4-year plan, it could be a 6-year plan, but as you all know, strategic plans are often 5 years, and often businesses wouldn't want to invest in, or commit to investing or pledging for much longer than a 5-year period. The advantage of doing it 5 years rather than 3 or 4 is you don't have to keep doing it quite as often. You run a campaign, you create your strategic plan, and then you spend the next 4 to 5 years implementing it. So often these campaigns are public-private partnerships, which I've already mentioned that term. And that's typically, at least in our experience, considered best practice in the economic development organization world, having both the public sector and the private sector at the table. During these campaigns, we are not trying to get every single business in a large community on board, so it's a little different than a Chamber of Commerce membership drive where you want to get mom and pop coffee shop on board. We're really focusing on the top slice of the business community, so the top 100 to 150 prospects, and we are making in-person asks of those businesses. So we, as the fundraising professionals, go usually with the executive director of the organization, and often with a volunteer leader, a community leader, door opener, and we sit down and make the case for why this prospect should invest in this 5-year initiative. The final bullet, these campaigns are often run in parallel to a total resource campaign. So you can do both, but the capital campaign is to fund things distinct from the total resource campaign, which is usually just kind of funding general operations, what the organization's already been doing, in contrast to a capital campaign, which is funding a new, exciting, kind of muscled up initiative of the organization. Okay, I don't see any questions, so I'll keep plugging along. So we touched on these in a little less detail previously when I talked about some of the things that these capital campaigns fund, but I'll go into this in a little bit more detail. I see Professor Miller has mentioned ADP of Hattiesburg did their 5-year Pinnacle campaign in 2016. Okay, great. So some of the things that we will be funding with capital campaigns are business attraction and recruitment, business expansion and retention, and that's usually things that economic development organizations or chambers who have the ball in economic development have already been doing. That's kind of their bread and butter. But they may want to go to the next level. Maybe they only have one project manager and they really want to go hard on this and have, hire two. So that's often one of our goal areas in our plans is continuing to recruit, expand, retain businesses. The next couple of bullets deal with talent and workforce, which I already mentioned is a hot area. Business climate and advocacy are the next bullet, and that's something that we often see. We've run a couple of campaigns recently where transit was a big issue for our clients, and specifically having better highways, so an expanded highway system or an expanded interstate. So businesses could easily get to the international airport. So that's something that our client wanted money to help advocate the state legislature in relation to. And so that was one of their 3 goal areas in their plan. The next couple of bullets deal with small business and entrepreneurs. And that can either be kind of a separate goal area, separate goal in the strategy or initiative, or it can be kind of a subset of helping local businesses expand. We've mentioned consultants and buildings, as well as industrial parks, spec buildings, that kind of things, and opportunity funds to help businesses who may want to locate in that community. Here are a few more strategies, and I'm going to let you all just take a moment to go ahead and glance at these. Some of these are a bit more specific. In the penultimate bullet, we have expand local military facilities and seek additional missions for the base, save the base campaigns. We have worked in some military communities and have done just that, but also work to have the military base be an economic development asset or an asset for the community, and have an initiative around what else can we do to really leverage this asset, and is it having partnerships with the military base? Is it trying to get headquarters for some of the vendors for that base to locate, or at least open offices near there? So thinking about how to use that facility as an economic asset. And I see Professor Miller, if they bring back bracket, should be good for your business. Yeah. Okay, I guess no questions about these strategies. So how do we go about kind of putting together a plan? So we sometimes have people say to us, okay, well, I want to raise an additional $400,000 a year for our organization. And we'll say, oh, okay, well, what do you want to do with that money, or what's the need? And we get just kind of a blank stare. So as far as the cart before the horse, you don't need to run a campaign if you don't need additional money. And usually that additional money is needed to fund the implementation of a plan. So I think the plan and thinking about what is the big problem or need in our community that we as an organization can help solve, that's really the first step. What can we do as an organization to really get results and to improve our community? So developing that 5-year plan is very important, and that's actually something we help with. So sometimes we follow a consulting firm that will do a real deep dive strategic planning. Sometimes these processes are 6 to 9 to 12 months, and they do, comparisons between communities. And we don't do that kind of deep dive strategic planning process, but we can follow organizations who do that. And we do more consultative strategic planning process. So we can help put plans together. So obviously you want to have your vision, you want to have your strategies, and then how you actually affect and implement those strategies through your tactics. And what will your results be? How will you measure success? So after a plan is put together, the next step is a funding feasibility study. And we or someone like us would come in and conduct 40 to 50 interviews, confidential interviews. So no one from the organization is present, just Power 10 and the prospect or stakeholder. And we get their input on the plan. We find out what they think about it. And during the process where we usually spend 45 to 60 minutes with each prospect or with each stakeholder, we're identifying weaknesses and strengths in the plan, weaknesses and strengths in the organization, who might be our campaign leaders, and what is a realistic goal. Is the goal we're testing or talking about of, let's say, $400,000 a year, is that feasible? What do those we are interviewing say that they would invest during a campaign if it goes to a campaign? We also make recommendations about how long we expect a campaign to take, and a lot of that turns on the amount to be raised as well as what we hear during that. Professor Miller asked, how often do we find the plans are not liked by potential donors? It's very unusual that most of the potential donors think the whole plan is bad. But we definitely get some good input on areas of focus. I think that goal 1, usually we have 3 goals in our plans, that goal 1 is much more important to us than resonates much more with stakeholders than goals 2 or 3. And so we get a lot of really good feedback. We also get feedback on positioning. So they may think that the way something is described is hard to understand or areas of focus. So we do get a lot of good feedback, but we ask very specific questions about whether they think the plan is exactly what's needed, largely on target, a good first step. And so we're able to, once we go from a feasibility study to a campaign, we are always rewriting at least portions of the plan because it's very unusual to have just a rubber stamp by all the interviewees. And when you're conducting interviews with the top prospects, you really want to hear what's meaningful to them, because they're going to be the ones that your campaign's going to kind of be won or lost on. So at the end of the study, we prepare a report and we present usually to the board, and we make those recommendations about the campaign goal and whether they should go forward. Typically, if we've recommended they go forward, they agree. Typically, these campaigns take 8 to 10 months, and then you're done until 5 years from then. And there's no need to have an annual fundraising effort like most organizations do, or be at the whim of your public sector funders, your county commissioners, or whoever really holds the purse strings if you're primarily government funded. So I imagine it's pretty hard. If someone could let me know if it's difficult to read this chart, and I can just go over kind of the big blocks of it. We don't need to go over every step in detail, but this kind of breaks down that 8 to 10 month campaign process. On the far left is the feasibility study, and the main parts of that are us preparing for the interview, so putting together the plan, putting together the list of those we would invite to interview. Then phase 2 in the study is conducting those interviews. Phase 3 is we prepare a report and make our campaign recommendation. So that's the study, which we've already talked about. For the campaign, the big blocks are phase 1, where we're building the campaign foundation. We're preparing to go out and start making asks. So we are refining our case for support, which is the description of the plan itself, the description of the strategic initiative, and we're refining that based on what we heard from interviewees. And we also hold meetings with key stakeholders. We usually have a program refinement committee. We are also putting together the other marketing materials, as well as preparing all of our documents so we can go out in phase 2 and start recruiting leaders and securing our lead pledges. So sitting down and making those asks of our top prospects. Typically, you'll get half of your campaign goal from your top 25 or so prospects. So when I said earlier, you're going to win or lose your campaign on your top prospects, that really is true. So there, a lot of thought is put into cultivating those individuals and getting them on board at a very early stage. In this final Go Public and Win, phase 3, we have a campaign public kickoff once we're over 50% of the goal. And then we, at that kickoff, we're celebrating the success to date, thanking those who've already invested, those who've already pledged for the 5-year pledge period, and then cultivating the rest of the prospects, encouraging them to get on board. So that's a very, very quick run through of the campaign process. So this slide just is an example of these 5-year cycles that we're talking about. So let's say an organization ran their first campaign in 1991, and then they've been running one every 5 years since then. As you'll see, if they've done a good job communicating with the business community, showing results, and just being good stewards of the money that's been entrusted to them from the business community, then they can go out and ask for more in the next campaign, if the plan warrants that. And so over these 5-year cycles, you're not just saying, okay, we're going to raise $3 million and then we're going to come back and ask for $3 million again. This kind of shows that if you're growing your investor pool, so you're bringing new folks on board because they see the benefits, as well as having existing investors who really see the ROI, the return on investment, they'll want to go to the next level. So you can do, as an organization, a lot more over time through this model. That's what that slide illustrates. So securing maximum investment. So how to position your economic development organization. So this is talking about the plan. Do you have a compelling value proposition? What is the need in your community? I've said this a few times now. The need or the problem to be solved. And it can be something that's quite obvious, or something that EDOs all over the country are doing, or it can be something a bit something unique. For example, that client that I mentioned who said, we really need this interstate from the airport to our town widened, and that is really important. That's going to make a big difference. And so they raised the money, and that's something that they are working on now and have had a lot of success already. So assessing what the need is, putting together a plan, and then being ready to articulate the benefits and the return on investment. We often, during campaigns, have an economist conduct an economic impact analysis for us. So we will say during the campaign that here are the results or measurables to be expected. We're going to, under this plan, bring an additional, let's just say 200 more jobs to the community per year. So that is 1,000 new jobs over the pledge period. What is the economic ripple effect of that? There will be X million dollars more in the community associated with the new payroll for those 1,000 people. There will be more professional services firms that get business and spring out of that. These new workers will be spending money at local establishments. So that economic impact report can be very, very helpful in explaining return on investment for prospects. So typically Professor Miller asked about fiscal or tax impact as well as economic impact analysis. We typically don't. We're typically just focused on jobs, and sometimes we run the ripple effect of capital investment as well. But it's typically just the jobs goal. So the title of this slide is how to position the EDO for maximum investment. So have a compelling value proposition. So something people, to put it in kind of sales terms, something people want to buy. What do people want to invest in? Do they see a real need and an ROI there? And then you need strong, engaged leadership. So you want the business community to think this is important, to rally around this. And then finally, you need efficient campaign execution. So you need a well-run, well thought out campaign. So you got to show the value, you've got to have leaders, and then you've got to execute well. Speaking of economic impact, this is just a little, at least on my screen, it's a little hard to, this table of contents looks a little distorted. We do have other pages here. But again, this is pretty small. I apologize, it's hard to read. So this is one that was conducted for one of our clients by the Atlanta Regional Commission. And yeah, I'm sorry, this is all garbled. I'm not sure why. But you can't see this very well. But here we've got the economic impact of jobs, to the direct impact, the indirect impact, the induced impact. And those were those things I was describing. So direct jobs, who is being brought to the community because of our business recruitment efforts. And then indirect jobs, what are the ripple effect jobs? Because of that, there will be more lawyers and more accountants, and then the induced impact. So there will be additional spending in restaurants and retail and that kind of thing. And then you have the total impact of those. And then we, in these reports, run the ripple effect grouped by industry or sector, kind of have a breakdown of the consumer expenditures. So businesses can see, oh, okay, so if there's an additional, let's say 1.2 billion coming into my community because of these jobs and capital investment goals, the delivery on those, then, and this is the percentage that's going to be spent on housing or on furnishings or on healthcare. And so I can expect to get, this percentage of the pie there. And so it really brings it home for them. And typically, and you can see it here, but you can't read it probably, on this right-hand side of the economic impact analysis. I think this is what it is, although it's hard to read. We can even go into detail for banks, showing what their expected additional net deposits will be because of our successful implementation of the plan. So you can make a very carefully crafted and detailed argument to banks about the effect on their business of having this new influx of cash because of the payroll for these 1,000 new workers over the 5-year period. Okay, so how do you actually get folks to pledge? Well, I've touched on this a bit earlier, and that's with that in-person ask method. So typically a volunteer leader, so someone who is part of the volunteer leadership of the campaign, who is invested and has a relationship with the prospect that you want to get to say yes. So we will bring that person along, and they're really passing along their goodwill to us and saying, hey, I'm endorsing the campaign here. The senior staff member is also there because if you think about it, the prospect is really investing in them because they will be the key person implementing the plan over the 5-year period. And then we, someone from Power 10 or another organization like this, is there to explain how the campaign works. We make the ROI case, and we actually articulate the ask. We make the ask, and that is something different about Power 10. There's some organizations that don't do that. Okay, so that's making the ask. So this is an example of a pledge table. You might have either heard of a pledge table or a giving pyramid, but it's kind of the pathway to your goal. So this is an example of a $2 million goal. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of the BDC of Van Wert in Van Wert, Ohio, but we ran a campaign for them. And This shows how many pledges you need at a certain level to reach the goal. And you don't need to study this or get all of this, but this is primarily here to show that we typically ask for or seek a lead pledge of 10 to 20% of the total goal. So if you have a $2 million goal, you'll want to have maybe a $200,000 or $300,000 or even $400,000 lead pledge. And you'll get the vast majority, as you can see here, of your funds, again, from that top 10 or top 20%. So we're showing prospects during the feasibility study this pledge table and asking them where you might fall here. So those were most of the things that I wanted to cover, and I wanted to see if anyone had any questions. That was, I know, a lot of information, and maybe the first time some of you were hearing all that, but happy to go back and speak in more detail about any of the slides or anything you might want to know about fundraising. So Professor Miller has asked a tax question. So is tax deductibility a big issue? It depends, as you probably know, on the structure of the organization, whether the payment can be tax or the pledge can be tax deductible. So obviously for our community nonprofits, those are almost always 501c3s and are tax deductible. For chambers and economic development organizations, sometimes when setting up a public-private partnership and engaging in this type of fundraising, when it's been an almost exclusively public sector entity, sometimes, or I should say pretty often, we set up either a 501c3 or 501c6 so the money can go into that. So there can be some tax deductions. And also because you need a separate entity for the funds to flow into. If it's, kind of like a development authority that's kind of quasi-governmental. So we don't get a lot of individuals investing in these chamber or economic development organization campaigns, but there is some of that. But typically, this is coming out of kind of a marketing budget. As far as how the new tax laws will impact this, it's a bit hard to say, and I don't know that we have seen much of a knock-on effect yet. But watch this space. Any other questions? Well, while you all think of questions, Professor Miller said it may be helpful for me to tell you all a little bit about me. So I kind of stumbled into this line of work. My background is actually law, not tax law, but I was an employment lawyer for many, many, many years, and actually did fundraising as a volunteer, and really enjoyed that. And our CEO for Power 10 is also a former lawyer, and he was a law school classmate of mine, and he spoke very highly about his work and seemed to really enjoy it. And so about 4 years ago, I made the jump and joined Power 10 and left law, and have really enjoyed it. It's very interesting getting to work with different clients and really seeing communities be transformed. Sometimes it's just an incremental change or a gradual transformation, but we have seen some pretty dramatic things happen in communities, which has been really interesting and really enjoyable to be a very small part of. So that's a little bit about me. Any other questions? And
Thank you.
Professor Miller, let me know if you want me to hit stop presenting at any point.
Sure. Well, I can take over. Yeah, everyone's been pretty quiet tonight. I don't know what's quiet. Um, well, no, I mean, you hit the big points that I was interested in. I see a couple students are typing to get the idea about what capital campaigns are, um, and then how they relate to strategic planning, and then also how it can be used for financing different types of EDOs, which are all the points that I was hoping you'd cover. So I appreciate that.
Well, I really appreciate you all listening. And Professor Miller has my contact information. Power10, of course, also has a website. So please feel free to take a look at that and contact me. My colleague Sean McCula also knows Professor Miller, and I'm sure he would be happy. Sean would also be happy to answer any questions if you want to reach out to either of us with any questions at all, and would be happy to help. And I wish you all the best of luck as you embark on your careers.
Now, do you guys still exhibit at IEDC?
We do. So we exhibit at IEDC. We usually go to ACCE, Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives. And then we're also involved with GEDA, Georgia Economic Developers, so in SEDC, so in the Southeast. So we most of our work actually comes from referrals and word of mouth. We think winning campaigns is our best kind of marketing strategy, but we do some conferences. Yeah.
Okay. Well, again, thank you very much for taking the time tonight. I appreciated it, and I'll let you go now, and then we'll take a little break, and then we'll come back in about 5 minutes.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Ann. Thanks. Okay, let's come back at 8 o'clock, and we'll finish up what we need to do. We need to go over boards and then financing EDOs in general tonight. So let's come back at 8 o'clock, and we'll start up again. Okay, we're going to talk about governing boards, and hopefully by now you realize how important working with boards is for economic development. And there are a number of different types of boards. David Miller from last week worked for a board of supervisors. So you work for a public agency, you very well could be working for a board of supervisors. And there are a lot of other different boards out there, depending on what type of nonprofit you work for: board of directors, board of trustees, board of governors, governor's council, other terminologies out there. And there are also some other boards, such as advisory board, but these don't have the same governing responsibilities as the true governing boards above. And we'll talk a bit about some of the responsibilities of boards. So I pulled this, if you can see it. This is the ADP board. So you can see the officers are current officers from Camellia Healthcare, from University of Southern Mississippi, that's Chad Driscoll. The VP for External Affairs, I think is his title. The First National Bank, the past chair is of Forest Health, and then Chad Newell is the other officer. He's the director. Then they have an executive committee, includes the top of Cooperative Energy, president of Bancorp South, some insurance company, a power company, and CR Properties. Does anybody know what CR Properties is? Take a guess. CR Properties.
I don't know.
Don't know? I was thinking somebody in Hattiesburg might know. CR Properties is the Tatum Group. They're doing the Midtown projects. And they're doing, when Regions Bank moved out west, they bought a lot of the buildings that Regions Bank moved out of. So they're a big property developer in Hattiesburg. Board of directors, you can see design and an engineer, more healthcare, Coke, Clinic, Regions Bank. And then you can see they have ex officio members, such as the Board of Supervisors rep, Forest County rep, Toby Barker from the city of Hattiesburg, Forest County Supervisors, the mayor of Pearl. So some big wigs on this board, some big influential players are on the ADP board. Um, David, any comments on the ADP board?
No, I know a lot of those people on there, and that's very similar to the same situation I've had. It's very standard makeup, probably the most standard mix of people with the ex officios on there, supervisors and um, people from the municipalities, and a big mix of your donors, and they normally get a spot on the board.
Yeah. So these are a lot of those 100 companies that Amity talked about are on this board, as David pointed out there. They were part of the Capital Pinnacle campaign, so they're on the board. Now, Pearl River County is just setting up its economic development organization, which can be mostly public funded, and so they've broke it up by the 5 districts in Pearl River County, and each of the districts got to appoint somebody. So I pulled one's a retired rocket scientist, somebody out of Stennis, uh, Pearl River Community College VP, Scott Alford, he does workforce development there, manager of a tractor company, a nurse, and a body shop owner. So you can see quite the difference between a smaller public EDO, Pearl River County, and Hattiesburg ADP. I don't know. David, any comments on the new Pearl River County board? Pretty typical to you?
Yeah, pretty typical. Small board for a small county.
And some really local people, some no economic development, other ones, I mean, I don't know if the body shop owner, how much he knows about economic development, but so different level of expertise as the ADP board. So there are a number of types of governing boards. You can have an elected boards. So if you have a membership organization, you can hold elections to who's going to be on the board. And so it could become a popularity contest rather than expertise. So you sometimes get uneven skills. And the director says a high tolerance for uncertainty. You never know who's going to be elected. So, but on the other hand, they don't become stale, and you generally get a mix each group. So one type of nonprofit board is a elected board. You have self-perpetuating boards, and this new members are selected by existing members to fill their slots. So if somebody's a treasurer, then they would look for somebody with treasurer skills to try to fill their spots. And so this creates stability, and you're making sure you're filling for the skills. On the other hand, you tend to create homogeneity, and that people are, you might get cliques, self-perpetuating themselves. There's appointed and hybrid boards, and this is a typical model for organization where you have some of the members are appointed through certain, so for instance, Pearl River County, they're appointed by the district supervisors, and you could have some kind of hybrid where some are appointed, some are perpetual, or some mix thereof. So this is pretty hard to read, but this is straight from your book, and you can see the advantages and disadvantage of having an elected board versus self-perpetuating versus a hybrid, and so forth. So David, any comments on the different types of boards and the way to select members?
A lot of times, Chad, after you've done this for so long, you start to realize that you get a lot of people on these boards that are just, they don't really take the time to be on them. They're there because they have to be because of their job. Not everyone that gets on a board is engaged. And so I think more importantly than what types of, whether they're elected or whether they're promoted or appointed, is that you just get really good, non-selfish people on the board that are engaged and want to volunteer. I'll be honest with you. I'm on a board right now for the United Way. They meet it seems like every 2 weeks. I never have time for it. And it's just hard to get engaged when you can't devote the time to it. And so the real key is getting good people on the boards. And it's not so much whether they were appointed or elected. I would say a lot of time, and I'm not being negative about any of these, but a lot of time the elected governing boards, they have more of a will to get involved and be involved. There was a little more effort for them to go through the process of being appointed. That makes sense.
Yep. Good. And just be aware there are some advisory boards and council which really don't have the legal or governing authority. A lot of times they're called on for special projects or oversee certain aspects of the organization. So these advisory councils of board are different than the governing boards. So what kind of board do you think EDOs should have? See what people think. Advisory board, elected governing board, self-perpetuating governing board, appointed governing board, hybrid governing board, or some other. Let's see who's still listening. You can just do A, B, C, D, E, or F. And if F, maybe put your comment in. Walter says A. David Parker says E, not C. Okay. So it looks like most people support some kind of other board. So just be aware there are different types of boards. But the true boards do have certain responsibilities. Fiduciary responsibility for the organization, and they're guardians of the mission. So they're keeping track of the finances, making sure that the finances are straight or in order. There's hopefully no hanky-panking going on. And they are accountable for everything the organization does and how things are accomplished. So they are supposed to be supervising and being aware of what all is going on as far as achieving the mission and financial accountability. Now, legally, how does this play out? It's a bit mixed. The Sibley Hospital case set the legal responsibilities where a board member needs to have care, loyalty, and obedience. So care, they need to do due diligence in monitoring and supervision. They need to care about what's going on, be engaged. They need to have loyalty. They need to not have conflicts of interest and put their interests above the mission of the organization. And then obedience, they need to obey the laws and rules of the organization. So those are the legal criteria for being on a board. In the mid-90s, board members became more personally liable for their organization's behavior. And then the Sarbanes-Oxley Acts created more rules for boards, including destruction of documents, protection for whistleblowers, and so forth. So there are legal responsibilities of these boards. So hopefully they take it seriously, because there are some legal responsibilities for these board members. And we already talked about this Form 990. The nonprofits need to file this 990, which will include board members and information on the board members. So, David, any comments on legal responsibilities of the board?
No, you covered it.
Okay. So functionally, what do the boards do? They appoint, support, and evaluate the CEO or the head economic developer. They're supposed to establish the mission and the purpose. They should approve the different programs and activities of the board. They need to do financial management, make sure the accounting's straight and the finances are in good order, and they establish performance for organizations and the accountability. So they're overseeing what's going on to make sure that the staff is doing what they're supposed to be doing. But one of the questions, go ahead.
Chad, you also, a lot of times you will break up your different board members into committees, and there will be like a fundraising committee, there will be a governmental affairs committee, a legislative type committee, and you can really tailor the committees best to who's on the board. You know, if you've got an attorney on the board, maybe they can help with legislative affairs or passing certain legislation. You know, your governmental affairs, your ex officio members can be head of your governmental affairs committees. It's really how you decide to use the board is their responsibility also to help you accomplish, you know, long-term strategy goals.
Okay. And it's the relationship between the board and the CEO is crucial. And so you're thinking about there's sort of extreme scenario one where the CEO just manipulates and controls the board and the board is just a pure rubber stamp. The other extreme scenario is where the board micromanages the CEO and the CEO has no authority. So I don't think you really want either end of that extreme. So ideally, you want a partnership between the board and the CEO. And there are different views on how this should be operated, but there needs to be a good working relationship between the board and the CEO and each taking care of its responsibilities. David, any comments on the board-CEO relationship?
No, you got it.
There are three basic models of board CEO in your textbook, and there's a lot more details. Hopefully you've read this and understand it. So the policy governance model holds that the board establishes the policy and that the executive implements the policy defined by the board. So the board sets out, here's the rules, and then the director decides how to follow those rules and to implement those rules. The next one is a governance is leadership model, which assumes the board has more of an implementation role than in the first model, and that in certain areas the board will get involved in as needed. So whether it's fiduciary, strategic, or generative areas. So maybe if the organization's having financial issues, the board would get involved with the implementation of making sure that things get corrected and implemented and get involved. And the third model is the psychological centrality and board-centered leadership. And this starts with the supposition that really when you look at an EDO, for instance, you really think about the executive director of the EDO, not the board. And that a lot of times the CEO becomes the face of the organization and that really is expected for leadership of the organization. This idea that the CEO is going to be the face and people expect them to be the leader, but they need to work with the board to help accomplish their mission. So
that's generally the way it works.
Yes, and it should work. I think it works more effectively that way. So, example, the Community Development Foundation. When you think of the Community Development Foundation, at least I generally think of David Rumbarger, the president, CEO, and less so thinking of his board. Now, I know he does have a board, and looking at them, they're a pretty high-profile group of companies. So, the president of the community bank, a construction company, president of healthcare, president of a large manufacturer, art gallery owner, I don't know about that, CEO of a bank, president of a real estate corporation, and 5 at-large members. So, but despite these being high-profile people, you think of Dave Rumbarger as being Community Development Foundation and having the board support him. So, David, any comments on CDF?
No, David's been there a long time. Does a great job.
Yep, and he is held up as an example of a prime economic developer. Now, pulled Joe Max's board, and so he has a local insurance company, a local real estate company, a banker, a Main Street program, a local recycling company, local office supply company, a local financial planner, and that's his executive committee, and then he has a board of directors of various small bankers, a restaurant, and so do you see anything missing from this? Liz pointed out education, and that's what jumped out to me, that I didn't see Mississippi State on it or any of the education, and I don't know all the people on the board, but it did seem like they weren't as much the big names in the community as ADP and CDF. I don't know, David, have any thoughts on Golden Triangle's board?
Yeah, I mean, I know a couple of people on that board. That's still a pretty rural area up there. They get a lot of, their success has been because of the relationship with TVA more than anything. But I know people from the Electric Power Association that are on his board, and it's a pretty typical makeup. But Joe Max runs the show there.
And that's what I figured. It's, as far as the boards around the state, it's probably the more extreme to the CEO running the show. I mean, it's
Definitely. Yeah.
I don't know if they're quite a rubber stamp, but more to that than some of these other ones I looked at.
Well, he's earned the leeway to be able to do it his way.
Yeah, and he probably
he's got a really proven track record there.
He does, and that he does his own stuff. He does it very well. So, I mean, I'd almost be surprised if his board didn't look like this. So it's interesting when you come in about who's on the board, what type of organizations, and so forth. And okay.
Generally, no matter who's on the board, they're going to give you the leeway. They're going to give you a couple of years to run the show the way you want to. So they'll give you enough, for the most part, they give you enough rope to either be successful and earn the respect to continue to do it your way, like Rumbarger and Joe Max have done, or they're going to be looking for somebody else.
Yep. So with this board center leadership model, some of the things the CEO needs to do is facilitate interaction in the board relationships, making sure the board members interact and work with each other. They need to show respect and consideration for the board members. They need to show the board that what change needs to be done, what innovation needs to be taken. Needs to provide information to the board, keep the board informed about what's going on, maintain the structure, and let the board know about your accomplishments and productivity. Let the board know how well you're doing. So these are some of the things for the better performing boards that you see the CEO doing. And here's the 12 principles of exceptional boards. They are constructive partnership between the CEO and the board. They are market driven. They strategic thinking with a strategic plan. The board is willing to ask questions and be independent, open mind. That there's transparency, that there's integrity, there's sustainability, results oriented, and continuous learning and revitalization. So you can see these are the principles of the more exceptional boards. And I won't get into this so much. There's some questions with measuring the board. And the boards need to, they talk about this Janus metaphor. So the boards need to look inward to the organization, but also be looking outward to the community and so forth. So it can be a complex role for these board members to have this Janus metaphor to be looking internally and externally. And yeah, I'm not sure why MSU is not on Joe Max's board. So David, any final comments on boards?
Everybody here's going to work for one. You better be nice to them.
Yep.
There's a lot of politics that are involved in boards. There's some people that are going to be on the board to get leads for their wife who's a real estate agent, or so they can make more bank loans. And then you're going to have people that are there, like generally your hospital people that are there because they really are wanting to better the community. The main thing is whenever you have a ribbon cutting, you have your board there and have everybody, in the pictures. They're mainly there for pictures. I don't mean to be cynical. It's kind of the truth.
Yep. But they're important for you to do your job is having the board.
They're your boss.
Yeah.
They're your boss.
So we're going to switch over to funding economic development organizations if this comes up. Try to finish up on time. Okay. Can everyone see that? The new types of EDO organizations? I guess so. Okay. So the funding options depend on the structure of the EDO. So you could have a public, private, or public-private. So depending on whether it's one of those types, you're going to have generally different types of funding for it. So a public organization, you could have general funds, and a public-private, you could have general funds, but you won't have it for a private organization. Whereas membership dues, it's a private organization or a public-private, not so much a public. So a lot of the different funding options that go into financing your economic development organization are going to be driven by the type of board you have. But a survey shows that over half of EDO operating funds come from public sources. So really, no matter what type of organization, generally, unless you're pure private, that you're still going to be getting some public funds. So David, you want to talk about the funding for MDA?
Yeah, sure. So over the last couple of years, they've gone through a bit of and this is a mirror image presentation of the one we did 2 weeks ago where we talked about, well, no, I guess it was last weekend, where we talked about the different types of organizations and agencies. Now we're going to talk about how each of them are funded. This one's funded straight from the legislature. They do get some federal funding that they run through some programs, a lot like the PDDs do. But as you can see, they're looking at, their funding is really based on the state budget, and economic development is always one of the agencies that's one of the first to be cut and suffer budget cuts. So they have 23 loan programs like I talked about. Those have to be funded and refunded through every year through the legislature as well. So what happens is not only does the agency not have as much money to operate on, and they might have to go through hiring freeze or cut back on jobs or not give raises to current employees, they also have more limited funds for certain grant programs or loan programs that they may have, or bond programs.
Okay. And as David mentioned, the EDO budget, particularly the state level, can be political. So it's
It's more than can be.
yeah. So every year it seems like it comes up, and there's certain people who seem particularly eager to put MDA over the coals, looking at their out-of-country trips and travel expenditures and so forth. So every year you just don't know. Regional EDOs.
Okay, so these are regional organizations are generally they're okay. Like number 3, Jackson, Greater Jackson Alliance. I remember Chad when Ross Tucker was there. He was basically it's membership driven. If there were organizations or he was soliciting for electric power associations, Mississippi Power, Entergy, all of the big utilities in the 7-county area, which is number 3 there. Each of these 7 are funded differently, slightly differently, mainly the same. But it's mainly through memberships. There might be some county monies that come back into it, but generally it's for to be a member of the Greater Jackson Alliance. Hinds County would put a portion of the money in and be a member of it. Rankin First would put some money into it and be a member of it, and pool their monies in small ways. That wasn't the only thing that Rankin First, which is the Rankin County Economic Development Organization, that was not that. Not all of their money went to Jackson Alliance, but some of it did. ADP is a mainly membership organization, and so is the next slide. We're going to get into each of the county, all of the county organizations. They're primarily there's some funding from the county. It's in the cities, and it might make up half of the budget. The other half of the budget is going to come from membership, which is where you get your board members. A lot of times, and Chad, sometimes, I don't remember us talking about it on the last presentation, but sometimes it's if a certain organization pays enough in membership, they get a seat on the board. That generally happens on some of the bigger organizations, bigger fundraising levels. Okay. Utility organizations. This is the power companies. So almost all of these, well, all of them are based on your power bill. They have different economic development operations as part of a department within their company, and it's all built into your power bill one way or the other. That goes with AT&T and their lobbying efforts, or ceasefire. It's not just electricity. It's the gas company, the railroad. They all have lobbying efforts, economic development efforts on certain different levels, and every bit of it is paid from it all comes from the customers. PDDs are a good bit different. They get money from the legislature, but then they get a good bit of federal funding for some of the different loans and grant programs that they administer. And a lot of times, like the PDDs, they will do a project for a local county or municipality, and they will charge a small fee for it, and that helps help to cover their budgets also. And then Main Street is all membership driven. The statewide Main Street organization, each of the Main Street members pay dues to Mississippi Main Street. I know that Gulfport does. I'm not sure exactly how much we pay per year, but I know we're a dues-paying member of Mississippi Main Street. Convention and Visitors Bureau. I'm not sure how Tupelo is, but I know on the Gulf Coast we have the only tourism-related tax that we have here is a bed tax. It's for hotels, and it goes to the Convention and Visitors Bureau, the CVB. Chad, are you familiar with how Tupelo works?
No, I forgot. Yeah, I did when I put it together, but I think it's the same way. I think it's a hotel tax. That's what typically they do.
Yeah, the restaurant, we don't have a restaurant tax here that I'm aware of. I believe ours is strictly hotels.
Yeah, you have plenty of hotels, so that makes sense. Um, some states have a local option sales tax to fund EDOs, which somewhat similar to the CVBs, where a percent of their sales tax goes to fund the economic development organization. And so some states that is allowed, and that's one of the funding mechanisms, this lost option of having a percent of sales tax, either overall sales tax or hotel or tourism or something. So Texas, for instance, has type A and type B organizations, which I'm sure Walter probably knows a lot about, and they're funded by a local sales tax, but that may not exceed 2%. And so you can see what type A's are for industrial development, and B also can fund museums, sports facilities, and affordable housing. And I found that EDOs in Texas seem to be very well funded. David, do you sort of get that impression too?
I would agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know that much about them, but I think you're right.
They tend to pay pretty well from what I understand too, so it seems like a pretty good place to be an economic developer. Um,
I haven't
Stone,
heard anybody complaining about it.
yeah, Stone County, who will take the visit to on Friday, is actually, I don't know if the only local funded through a lost tax, but so they get 2% of the gross sales receipts from room rentals and hotel.
Chad, isn't that how they had so much money that was basically put aside that the lady that worked there was able to siphon some off of?
Yes, so they built up a big war chest, which was too much of a temptation, but
Right.
yeah. So we'll go down to Stone County and they'll talk a bit more about how they came up with this funding model and put it together. And so what does the class think about this funding model? Do you think it's a good idea to have your EDO funded through some kind of sales tax? If anybody's still awake. Let me see, Walter's typing.
I'm going to go in and type no because generally, Chad, when you've got people that are, when you got, what I have found, places I've worked, when you've got memberships that are paying dues and you ask them to be engaged and help, generally they're more willing to because they're invested in you. Where in a situation like this, the money's just coming in. Nobody's really accountable for it. It's not coming out of anybody's pocket, so it's hard to get volunteers when there's just tax money rolling in, if that makes sense.
It's interesting. So they don't have a dog in that hunt, so to speak, so hard to give them help.
It's when you have people on your board that are paying dues to be there, then you're going to more than likely get them to help on a committee or be willing to be the treasurer or be an officer or show up for a festival on a Saturday morning at 7 o'clock to put tents up,
Okay.
or stay till 11 o'clock cleaning up after an annual meeting.
Okay.
Now on the reverse side, it's hard as hell to go out and raise money. This is a great way to have money to come in to be able to pay the bills.
So, yeah, pros and cons, but yeah, how do you incentivize people to stay involved when it's got a steady
Right.
stream? So, what do some of the research on high-performing EDOs say about funding? EDOs are becoming more self-sufficient and less reliant on the public sector overall. EDOs are looking for new funding streams from unconventional sources such as laws, capital campaigns, and so forth. But overall, that whatever the funding source, EDOs need to invest in their employees' work productivity and need to encourage engagement and performance. So, but overall, there is a trend to seeking other forms of financing than just public financing. Different creative options are being explored. We heard Power 10 talk about this strengthening investor relationship, shifting again from public to private funds, and they often hire a fundraising firm such as Power 10, who you heard about. So overall, economic development funding is a transition that there's been a lot with the recession when all the budget issues and so forth hit the local governments and so forth. It forced a lot of EDOs to look for other funding sources, and you can see what the average 30% versus 70%, and now it's 60 versus 40 for public. So there does seem to be an overall increase in having more private sector funding in EDOs, but public sector funding is still the major source. So David, any final points on funding?
No, I think we covered it.
Okay. And we'll have a later class where we go into budgeting. So here we're looking at the sources of funds. We'll have another class where we look at where the money's spent and how it's spent. But we wanted to make sure you're aware that the different types of organizations are funded differently. There are pros and cons of different approaches. The type of organization you have somewhat drives what kind of funding options you have. But overall, there is a trend away from being solely reliant on public sector funding to more private sector funding, which creates issues with accountability and even more needing to show results. So just want you to be aware these are the trends going on in economic development. So next week we're going to talk about EDO's budget, but the first part of the class we have Ben Teague. He's the Economic Development Director of Asheville in Bond County in North Carolina, and they have a really good organization. He runs a really good organization there. They're a certified economic development organization. So really,
Is he from Mississippi?
he is. He was at ADP when I first got here.
Okay.
I can't remember, Natchez. Maybe he's from Vicksburg or something like that. But yeah, he's going to be speaking at MEDC this summer.
Is he? Okay.
So, but Ben's a good guy, and I think it's an organization that I'm really impressed when he gave the presentation last year. Some of the stuff they're doing is really impressive. Then next week you have a discussion board. We've started to go into a bit more academic articles to discuss. We talked about administrative conjunction last time, and building on that theme, we're looking at networks, network governance, because really one thing I hope you're catching on, that networks is a key part of economic development. Being able to manage and work within your network is key. So We're going to be looking at some academic articles on that. And for the discussion, you get a half point for a comment and then another half point for a reply. So looking to try to get a little more engagement on these conversations. And then the end of next week, on Thursday and Friday, we have our in-person class. So I'll give you some time to work on your case studies, which aren't going to be presented until May 1st, but get some time to group. And remember your ethics case study. We have one looking at the beef processor plant, the other one at J. Paul Gum, and the third one, the use of eminent domain. So again, during the in-person class, you'll get some times to talk with people in your groups about the projects. And then here's the plan for the in-person class. We have Matthew Harrison from Grenada County. He's going to talk at the first part. We'll work on some case studies. And then Shannon Campbell's going to talk about project management. We're going to prep for Stone County. And then in the morning, we'll head out to Stone County. In the afternoon, we're going to start on the customer relation management training. We'll have a webinar on that. And one question, do you all want to have a social networking event on Friday night? Let me know. Or are you going to be sick of each other by then? Because we'll be midway through, because then Saturday and Sunday we'll be together. So if you talk to me this week about whether you want to have a social networking event, and if so, where? And if so, we'll do that on Friday night. So that is it. So any questions about economic development finance? I will be paying for the social networking event, and it consists, just like we went out for the first class, remember we went out to Keg and Barrel? So where do you guys want to go? I can get the food. I can't get the alcohol, so that's up to you. So you all talk amongst yourself if you want to do that on the Friday between the two in-persons, and then where you want to go. Okay, David, any closing comments?
No, I think we covered